Earlier in the week, there was a lecture about BSON and how BSON documents are represented in the shell. What we have to do now is see how we represent BSON documents using the MongoDB Java driver. So there's actually a number of ways to do it, but the main class that we use is called document. And you can create an instance of document just using a noargs constructor. And if you look at the document class, you'll see that it implements map of string to object. So since BSON is a map of keys to values, we know that the key needs to be a string, but the value is an object because of the diverse data types that BSON supports. There's no superclass except object that can represent them all. If we want to use the native types from Java to represent the native BSON types. So let me show you an example. So after constructing a document, we can start appending keys and values to them. So let's start off with string. So we can define the key as string and then the value as, say, MongoDB hello. And then if we want to pull that string out of the document, we can say document.get str, which as you can see returns an object. Or if we want to avoid having to do a cast, we can say string str equals and cast it to string. Or we can use one of the convenient helpers in the document class to get the string out and have the document class do the cast for you. And if you do that, you no longer need to cast. Now note that if the document does not contain a key str or the value of that key is not a string, you'll get an exception from this method. So one thing to notice is that the append method returns the document itself, so you can chain the append methods. So I can say append the integer 42, and similarly I can get that integer out using a helper. Now let's quickly go through the rest of the data types. So long, you can use a long obviously. Double, you can use a double. Boolean, you can use a boolean, so true or false. Dates, you can use the java.util.date class. Now for object ID, there's a class that's included in the driver itself called object ID, which will construct a new object ID for you. And you can also represent the null value, just using null. So those are the basic types, but as you learned, a BSON document can also contain nested documents or lists. So encoding those using the document class is very simple. So in this case, I have an embedded doc, and its value is itself a document. And in this case, I'm using an overloaded constructor that takes a single key value pair, just for convenience. And finally, a list. So I can use the arrays.asList method from the JDK and create a list of integers. But this can be a list of any object that the document class supports. So it could be lists of lists, lists of documents, lists of doubles, or a mix of types if you prefer. And let's print this out. So I have a convenient print.json function that I've added to this project, which uses a JSON writer class that's part of the driver to print a document as JSON. So if I print this out, and let's actually go and change this a little bit to indent so it's a little clearer. So let's look at the document class once again. And you might have noted that not only does document implement map of string object, it also is serializable. In addition, it implements an interface which is called BSON. And we're going to see the BSON interface as we move into CRUD operations. But BSON is a interface that has a single method called toBSONDocument. I'm not going to go into this method as it's a bit advanced to create a class that implements the BSON interface. But you'll notice that it has a method that returns a BSON document. And BSON document is a class that's similar to document, except that unlike document, instead of implementing map of string of object, it implements map of string BSON value. And BSON value is a base class for a number of other classes which represent every possible type defined in the BSON spec. So BSON document is useful because it's type safe. You can't put anything in there that is not supported by the BSON specification. So we'll see the BSON interface later when we're looking at the CRUD operations, because a lot of the methods that take things like projections and filters and sort criteria and update criteria and so forth actually take instances of BSON rather than document, so that you have maximum flexibility in terms of the classes that you actually use to represent those concepts in your applications. So if you're uncomfortable using a class like document which doesn't have type safety, you can use bson document and do things like bson document and so forth for all the other types that I showed you here. But for this class, we're going to stick with document because although it's not type safe, the code is a lot more concise using native types like string and integer rather than bson string or bson int32 or bson int64.